What is the experience of marrying a witch's wife right after crossing the border? Roy said, the taste of a witch is really good. Keywords of the novel. The feeling of pasting with Miss Witch is really great without pop-ups, and the feeling of pasting with Miss Witch is really great. Download the complete set of TXT, and the feeling of pasting with Miss Witch is really great. Latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Ceremony. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 2. Original Sin and Witch. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Original Sin and Witch. The edges of the character panel are constantly emitting gray smoke. Roy carefully observed and tried, but no matter how he touched it, the font on the gray character panel remained unchanged, like a light and shadow, as if it would only change when encountering a specific object. In the end, Roy locked his gaze on the Rubik's Cube. What would happen if 98% reaches 100%? He frowned and pondered. From the prompt just now, it can be seen that the increase in energy reserve progress is related to some kind of magical item put into my heart by the white-haired silver-eyed witch. What does lust magic source? A mixed branch of magic mean? Regardless of what this is, if you want to improve your energy reserve progress, it seems that currently there is only one way to devour magical items. Wait. Roy widened his eyes and stared fixedly at the 98% displayed below the mysterious cube. The gray character panel indicates that after absorbing magical items, the energy reserve progress has increased by 97%, but the current energy reserve progress is 98%. Where does this extra 1% come from? Is the gray character panel built.in? Roy thinks the possibility is very small. So, what is the difference between him last night and him now? Body. Soul. Space. Time. Wait, time. Does the energy reserve progress increase by 1% every day, even if nothing is done? This is Roy's guess, but he feels that 8 or 9 is inseparable from 10. The specific details will be determined by midnight tonight. The mysterious Rubik's Cube is the most promising way for Roy to resist the white-haired silver-eyed witch. But even if his guess is correct, it will take 2 more days to reach 100% energy reserve progress. Will the white-haired and silver-eyed witch give him 2 days? Roy is not sure. Although he doesn't know what will happen when the mysterious Rubik's Cube reaches 100%, this is already his last hope. Jia. At this moment, the door was pushed open and a knight with a helmet walked in from outside the door. With a granite-like resolute face and deep concern, the knight saw Roy waking up in bed and said in a deep voice, "Young Master Roy, the doctor has instructed you to rest in bed for 3 days. I'm sorry, for the sake of your health, if you don't listen to the doctor's advice and go out without permission again, I will do something illegal. I will bear all the punishment when Lord returns." Looking at the knight in front of him, Roy forced a smile and said, "Red. Uncle, don't worry, after this incident, I know the pros and cons." Red Turenbeer, a bronze 2-star knight loyal to the Turenbeer family, followed his original father in battles on the front lines when he was young and repeatedly defended him from deadly attacks. He was given the surname Turenbeer for his outstanding achievements. Although not related by blood, Red's presence is almost indistinguishable from that of a guardian in terms of his original father, who is often away from home. As the eldest son of Blackstone, Father is the first person on the list of the most feared people, while Red is the second. These are the remaining memories of the original body. You understand, that's good. Red's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. Roy's performance was a bit far from that lawless playboy of the past, but considering the strong stimulation this incident had brought to Roy, such a change was not incomprehensible. Nodding his head, Red continued to speak, "Young Master Roy, it is now a tumultuous time. There has been a dispute between the Kali Empire and our Radiant Empire since the beginning of the year. Your Highness, at the call of Duke Moray, has been going to the front line. As the eldest son of the Turumber family, you must protect yourself at this critical moment. As for those nightingales, Red gritted his teeth and said, when your body recovers, I will turn a blind eye and not report to the Lord. However, please do not leave the city without permission and leave the positioning talisman given to you by the Lord. I know you dislike the supervision and positioning of positioning talismans, but in case you have an accident, we can also quickly rescue you based on the positioning of the talisman. Fortunately, you're okay this time. If. Hearing the concern of the knight in front of him, Roy nodded solemnly and said, don't worry. After speaking, he seemed to remember something and turned to ask, Uncle Red, can you teach me how to practice chivalry? When speaking, Roy's eyes lit up slightly. The knight in front of us is not an ordinary knight, but a powerful knight in the bronze 2-star rank. We are naturally far from opponents against those witches who have mastered offensive abilities. However, if it is those witches who have just alienated and have auxiliary abilities, there is not a complete chance of winning. There were no knights practicing in his original body, and starting from scratch seemed a bit late, but for Roy now, any method that could increase his strength and improve his survival was something he was unwilling to give up. The origin of the path of knightly cultivation cannot be traced, but it is the strongest means for humans to survive in this world, resist those strange and terrifying monsters and even witches, and has its own unique characteristics. Internship, Formality, Bronze. After reaching Bronze, each level is further divided into 3 stars, with 1 star at the end and 3 stars at the highest. Since the beginning of his cultivation, the Bronze Knight has been a 3rd-level existence, let alone Red, who is still a Bronze 2-star, and among the Bronze Knights, he is not considered weak. Knight Cultivation. Young Master Roy, are you willing to learn? Upon hearing Roy's words, Red's surprise overwhelmed his worries. In the past, no matter how much he tried to persuade, Roy, who had experienced the pain of practicing as a knight, said that he was unwilling to continue practicing. The Tullenberg family is not a long-established aristocrat, but rather holds the title of Lord. It was Roy's father who achieved remarkable military achievements in a war 20 years ago and was bestowed upon by the Empire. As the 2nd-generation eldest son of the newly established noble family, if Roy is not outstanding enough, the Tullenberg family will be in jeopardy after lordship ages. This is something that Red, who is loyal to the Tullenberg family, would never want to see. In his mind, Roy was out of academia, but at least he had to have a knightly presence. Unfortunately, Roy in the past was unwilling to engage in knightly cultivation no matter how much he advised. And now, he actually took the initiative to mention it. Unable to help but feel some gratitude towards the nightingale who lured the young master out. Of course, thank you. After he catches this person, there will be no less punishment than he deserves. After getting excited, Red calmed down and shook his head regretfully under Roy's gaze. Young Master Roy, if you are willing to practice as a knight, I am naturally more than willing to teach you. However, your current physical condition does not allow it. Forceful practice not only fails to have the effect of exercise, but also further damages the body. The fastest way is to wait for your mental state to improve and your body to recover for a week before proceeding. As a Bronze 2-star knight, Red's words have considerable authority in the field of knighthood. This left Roy extremely disappointed. It is unknown whether he can live for another 2 days in a week. It seems that the path of knight cultivation is temporarily impassable. Roy thought silently in his heart, with a regretful expression on his face. I see, it's my anxiety. It's a good thing that you have this willingness. Red's eyes were filled with satisfaction. He leaned slightly and said, Young Master Roy, please rest first. I'll be guarding not far from the door. If you have anything to do, just give me an order. After speaking, Red went out. And Roy lay in bed, continuing to desperately think about how to make himself survive for 2 days. The center of Haixiling is Haishi town, surrounded by villages of all sizes. About 13 kilometers away from Haishi town, there is a small village called Vig. In recent years, with the friction at the border, Officialdom, as a border area, often recruits farmers as soldiers, which has also led to some houses being in a semi-abandoned state due to the absence of their owners. At this moment, in the basement of a half-collapsed stone house, the flickering dim yellow candle light reflected an extremely pale face. That is a girl lying on a wooden bed, wearing a light yellow dress, with a melon seed face, a young face, and two furry fox ears hanging from her head. And by the wooden bed, there was a white-haired and silver-eyed witch with an anxious face, pacing back and forth. How could this be? She looked at her comrade who had fallen into a coma in front of her, muttering to herself. Her black, flowing pupils were filled with anxiety and doubt. According to the plan, she buried the thing in the heart of Lord Officialdom's son, and then her companions could use it as a basis to manipulate the other person's words and actions. However, when the white-haired silver-eyed witch completed her mission and returned to her stronghold, she saw the fox-eared witch with a pale face and bleeding 7 orifices. If it weren't for the awakening of the witch, her physique would have been greatly baptized, far stronger than that of ordinary people, and she would have died long ago from such injuries. But even if she didn't die, she was on the brink of death. A day passed, and although the fox-ear witch had awakened, her condition became worse and worse. The white-haired and silver-eyed witch can sense that the pollution inside the fox-eared witch is gradually intensifying, causing her condition to deteriorate. The deterioration of the state has led to an increase in the rate of pollution exacerbation, forming a vicious cycle. That thing has been destroyed. Blackstone collar. It's strange. Don't go. The words spoken by the fox-ear witch to her when she woke up echoed faintly in her ears. The white-haired silver-eyed witch stopped walking back and forth, with a determined expression in her eyes. She is preparing to infiltrate the Lord's mansion in Blackstone tonight. The words of the fox-ear witch made her realize that the seemingly defenseless young man in front of her the night before yesterday was not as simple as he appeared. Behind him was a master. But no matter what, she must go to the Lord's mansion tonight because the fox-ear witch is almost unable to hold on anymore. She must find the source of the increasing pollution inside the fox-ear witch's body. The son of Lord Roy, or find the witch who served in the Blackstone realm. Haishi Town, Lord's Mansion, Study. The sunset brings a brief peace before the darkness. Roy took his hand away from the sword hanging on the wall in front of him and sighed. The knight's road cannot be expected in the short term. He can only focus on the Lord's mansion and see if he can find anything related to the magic item, thereby increasing the energy reserve progress of the mysterious Rubik's Cube. But to his disappointment, from barely regaining his mobility yesterday noon until dusk today, he almost flipped through the entire Lord's mansion, but nothing could cause a change in the gray character panel. This left him extremely disappointed. Fortunately, the mysterious white-haired and silver-eyed witch did not come to find him these days, which greatly relieved Roy. And tonight at 0.00, the mysterious Rubik's Cube will make up the last 1%, reaching 100%. At that time, his golden fingers will show their true appearance. Roy was looking forward to it, but he didn't dare to let his guard down. The closer you are to a critical node, the more you cannot relax. In order to safely pass the time from 6 p.m. to 0 a.m. tonight, Roy specifically instructed Red to strengthen the defense of the Lord's mansion. Although ordinary knights have no chance of winning against the witch, a 30-member knights led by bronze 2-star knights can still delay some time, right? Roy has already done everything he should and can do. And so, time passed by bit by bit. Late at night, the crimson moonlight flowed like flowing water in the courtyard and seeped into the room through the gaps in the windows, blurring out the brilliance. The moon in this world is different from blue stars, with a crimson color throughout, like the eyes of gods gazing at the human world. Roy sat on the bed with a tense expression on his face. There are only the last 3 minutes left until 0 o'clock. At this moment, in the corner of the entrance to the house where he was located, stood Red, a bronze 2-star, surrounded by 30 formal knights in full readiness. Ha! The light wind blew, and a black cloud covered the crimson moon in the high sky, causing the light on the earth to suddenly dim. And in the midst of this transformation of light and shadow, a figure appeared on the wall of the Lord's mansion. The black hood and robe almost dissolved in the night. She seemed to have some unique perceptual ability, walking towards the house where Roy was located. In just 2 minutes, she appeared in front of Roy's house. Behind her were several knights on standby, but no one noticed her passing. Quickly, the figure was less than 3 meters away from the wooden door of the house. Chong! The metal buzzing sound of the long sword unsheathed sounded, accompanied by a flash of sharpness in mid-air. The figure in the black robe raised his hand, and his slender index finger blocked the light white light emitted by the long sword. With a light sigh. Bronze Knight. 2 stars. Dong. The deep blue chill spread around the figure in the black robe, and Red, holding a long sword, flew backwards under the push of the shockwave. In mid-air, a faint layer of frost appeared on the surface of his body, making his whole body stiff and cold. Consciousness becomes stagnant, and the body is unable to move. The movement of Red's move caught the attention of the knights patrolling outside, but before they could approach, the deep blue chill covered the surface of his body with frost, and his eyes gradually became dull. Breathing. Breathing. The breathing of the figure in the black robe became rapid, as if suppressing something. The terrifying cold accumulated and danced wildly around her. Decades later, the coldness around the figure in the black robe gradually dissipated, and her breathing also slowed down. She didn't look around at the knights who had turned into ice sculptures, walked to the wooden door and pushed hard. Bang! The wooden door slammed heavily against the wall, making a loud noise. The crimson moonlight also took the opportunity to rush into the room, driving away the darkness. In the room, a young man in gray clothes sat cross-legged on the bed, lifted his head, and met the pair of pale silver pupils under his black robe, with black threads swimming rapidly inside. You have indeed come. With a calm face and calm eyes, the young man sitting cross-legged on the bed gave an inexplicable feeling, causing the silver-haired girl to stare for a few seconds. How to describe it? Confidence. Confidence. She is not sure. However, even though the boy in front of her felt completely different from the knight 3 days ago, in the end, she was just a knight who was not even an ordinary person. Even if she doesn't use her abilities, she is as fragile as ants. The white-haired and silver-eyed witch remained silent, raised her hand, and grabbed towards the young man. No matter how Roy caused the fox-ear witch to be seriously injured and on the brink of death, it would never be wrong to catch her first. Later on, slowly questioning will yield rewards. But just as the white-haired and silver-eyed witch's hand touched Roy's neck, a sudden transformation occurred. An indescribable suction came from Roy's body, and in an instant, the silver-haired witch felt the magic inside her body being drawn out and flowing into the other person's body. At the moment when the commotion outside the door appeared, Roy realized the arrival of the witch. But at this moment, with 0 o'clock and 1 last minute left, even if he was extremely anxious, he couldn't do anything and could only pray to Red and others to hold on for a while longer. However, what he didn't expect was that Red and others didn't hold on for even 3 seconds, not to mention a minute. Although they couldn't see what was happening outside, as the deep blue frost spread from outside to the floor inside, a strange silence fell outside, leaving only gasping sounds. This made Roy's heart rise to his throat. Decades later, the gasping sound subsided, the wooden door was forcefully pushed open, and a figure in a black robe walked in. The white hair floating out of the black hood allowed Roy to quickly identify the other person. It was the white-haired and silver-eyed witch who instilled something into his body 3 days ago at night. At this moment, there are only a few seconds left until 0. In order to make it through this last moment, Roy pretended to be calm and said words like, "You did come," in an attempt to delay time. If a magical item is absorbed, the other party will not know the reason and will inevitably suspect who is behind it. Doubt can lead to hesitation, which can lead to pauses and the possibility of procrastination. Due to the hesitation of the white-haired silver-eyed witch, Roy managed to hold on for the last 3 seconds. As the last 1% of the energy was replenished, Roy's mysterious cube, which only he could see, emitted a brilliant rainbow light. At the same time, a message emerged in his mind and was instantly understood by him. The mysterious Rubik's Cube is called the Original Sin Rubik's Cube. It has the following abilities. 1. The Original Sin Rubik's Cube can automatically absorb the energy of Original Sin that escapes from the world it is in, increasing its energy reserve by 1% every day. The Original Sin Rubik's Cube can absorb items containing the power of Original Sin and convert them into its own energy reserve, free. Every time the energy reserve progress reaches 100%, a face can be illuminated, and a talent can be obtained based on the type of Original Sin power contained in the absorbed energy. 4. The Original Sin Cube has storage space that can be opened or closed at any time. The size of the storage space increases with the number of illuminated faces of the Original Sin Cube. 5. More functions will gradually become available as the number of faces illuminated by the Original Sin Cube increases. At this moment, as the energy reserve progress reached 100%, the mysterious Rubik's Cube in front of Roy emitted a dazzling light, and one side of it, the pattern was clearly displayed. That is an animal shaped like a goat, with a faint purple edge. According to the type of subject that the Original Sin Rubik's Cube absorbs energy from this time, the corresponding Original Sin characteristic corresponding to his talent is, lust. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Unlimited Desire. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Unlimited Desire, Current Energy Reserve Progress. 100%, satisfying conditions, lighting up the Original Sin Cube. The main characteristic of the Original Sin category that detects energy absorption is lust. The desire for desire, the pursuit of stimulation, etc. are all the most extreme crimes of lust, light up, Original Sin Cube. Chapter of Lust. Obtaining talent. Unlimited desire, unlimited desire. Can devour any energy to satisfy one's own desires. Inside the room. At the first moment when Roy was choked on his neck, he unleashed his talent, the infinite desire. Subsequently, he was filled up. Full of various meanings. He felt like a balloon that had inflated to its limit, but the outside world was still pouring it into his body, causing the surface of the balloon to become thinner and whiter. In shock, Roy quickly turned off his infinite desire, cutting off external input into him. However, even so, what had already been inhaled did not return, making him extremely uncomfortable. If only my body could accommodate more, the ideas that come to mind are magically realized in the next moment. Roy felt like he was dispersing his full energy into countless small streams, flowing all over his body, nourishing muscles, bones, organs, and even cells that were invisible to the naked eye. Under this kind of nourishment, Roy felt that his condition had become better than ever before. The dispersed energy also greatly alleviates the swelling sensation in the body. Although it still exists, it can be foreseen that it will gradually disappear over time. Breathing. Breathing. In the room, there was a slightly rapid breathing sound from a man and a woman. At some point, the hand gripping his neck had disappeared. Roy looked towards the direction of the white-haired and silver-eyed witch not far in front of him, and what caught his eye was this scene. The dim candlelight intertwined with the crimson moonlight projected from the entrance, casting a hazy shadow on the frozen frost on the ground. A girl wearing a purple dress draped with white silk and a faint blush on her face collapsed to the ground, presenting a cute duck sitting. The difference between this scene and the cold and icy posture of the white-haired and silver-eyed witch in memory was so great that Roy was momentarily stunned. You. Looking at each other, for a moment, Roy didn't know what to do next. Take her down. Don't look at the delicate posture of the white-haired and silver-eyed witch now, but Roy believes that she will still find it easy to tidy herself up. Although his physique has strengthened, even the powerful bronze knight like Red is not a unified enemy in the hands of the witch, let alone him. And do nothing. This won't work either. Who knows what the recovered witch will do to him? Just as Roy's mind was spinning wildly, on the other side, the white-haired and silver-eyed witch's heart was also unusually complex. She stared blankly at her reflection on the floor and ice, watching as the swimming black line in her pale silver pupils decreased slightly. Has pollution disappeared? Although it is only a small amount, it is simply a miracle for the white-haired and silver-eyed witch who has never seen any decrease in pollution since her awakening. The danger of pollution is known to even ordinary civilians, let alone her as a witch. But in order to survive, she had no choice but to repeatedly use her abilities, causing the accumulation of pollution to become increasingly severe. The power of a witch is like the mud of an abyss, the more it is used, the deeper it falls, and in the end, only endless despair remains. Since she became a witch, she has never heard of anything that can reduce the pollution caused by witches even in the face of the encirclement of more than a dozen temple divine punishment knights. She, who had never wavered in her heart despite narrowly escaping death, had the urge to cry at this moment. She thought her inner strength was strong enough to face death calmly when she was on the brink of losing control. But when the dawn of hope appeared before her, she realized that she was far from as strong as she had imagined. People in the dark have a stronger desire for light, and can even say, madness. The girl looked at Roy. Roy also looked at the girl, his eyes met, and he instinctively blinked. The next moment, before Roy could react, the frost had spread to his entire body, freezing him completely in his widened pupils. The girl walked forward, picked up Roy with one hand, and then walked out of the door, her figure disappearing into the deep moonlight. Until 10 minutes later, Red in the corner outside the door finally broke free from the frozen state with the help of his fighting spirit. He looked at the messy courtyard and the empty house, and let out an angry roar. Witch! The dim basement. Roy sat on a cushion woven from dry grass. At this moment, the ice and frost covering his body had faded, and his clothes were damp and uncomfortable. As for his condition, it has returned to normal, and with the continuous nourishment of energy in his body, it is getting better and better. But he dare not act rashly. The power of the witch is far beyond that of ordinary people. Looking at the white-haired and silver-eyed witch across from him who remained silent and seemed to be pondering something, Roy felt that he couldn't just sit idly by. After some thought, he tentatively said, "Miss Witch, I think we can talk." The previous scene truly proved that although he has become stronger now, it is still impossible for him to resist the witch. At the moment when the frost struck, his body instantly lost its resistance. That's definitely not frost in the general sense. Roy is very confident. The activation of the original Sin Rubik's Cube has indeed brought remarkable abilities, but due to Roy's weak foundation, the effect it can exert is limited, at least not to the extent of fighting against the witch. He needs time, but unfortunately, what he lacks the most is time. Roy's voice stirred the eyelashes of the silver-haired witch, awakening her from a state of contemplation and turning her gaze away. I don't know if it's due to psychological effects. Facing the witch's gaze, Roy felt his body cool a bit. He said seriously, "There seems to be no unresolved conflict between us. What do you want? If I have it, I will definitely give it. If I don't have it, I will do my best to give it." Regarding Roy's words, the silver-haired witch remained noncommittal. She stood up and walked to the wooden bed beside her, saying in a cold voice, "Use your ability to suck my magic just now to save her." Following the fingers of the white-haired and silver-eyed witch, what caught Roy's eye was a pitiful fox-eared girl lying on her side curled up in bed. She looked only 18 or 19 years old, with a slightly baby-fat face that furrowed her brows due to pain, and her complexion was unusually pale. Is she also a witch? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Agreements. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Agreements. Is there another witch? This speculation came to mind, but Roy remained calm on his face. He took a deep breath, stood up, and came to the bedside of the fox-eared girl. As the distance approached, Roy could feel a clear chill rushing towards him. This coldness, unlike the coldness caused by temperature changes, was more like a feeling of instinctive fear in the soul. Under the gaze of the white-haired and silver-eyed witch, Roy carefully reached out his hand and gently opened the fox-eared girl's eyelids, seeing a large number of black lines swimming inside. Pollution. Sure enough, she is also a witch. However, just now the white-haired silver-eyed witch asked me to save her, and even said to use the ability to just suck my magic. Wait. Can it be said that the talent of infinite desire, in addition to energy, which is magic, can even absorb and transform pollution into energy to improve my physical fitness? Roy's heart trembled, and his thoughts couldn't help but delve deeper along this idea. If that's the case, then the current situation is no longer a dead end. Of course, the prerequisite is that he can really absorb pollution. Thinking of this, Roy's spirit lifted and he began to try. Although he just took a big sip of the white-haired silver-eyed witch with infinite desire not long ago, which still makes him flustered, the capacity of this thing, like some things, seems to be non-existent, but it can still be squeezed out with a squeeze. A small sip for testing is not a big problem. The explanation for infinite desire is simple, but after using it, Roy found that he now needs physical contact to use it. So, under the indifferent gaze of the white-haired and silver-eyed witch, who couldn't see her emotions, he extended his index finger and lightly tapped the center of the fox-ear witch's eyebrows. Unlimited desire, activate. In an instant, the familiar sense of indoctrination reappeared, but this time, Roy, who was prepared, just took a shallow sip and immediately disconnected, without holding himself up to the feeling of exploding. Whispering. The sleeping fox-eared witch let out a gentle reminder, as if she had been stimulated by something. Her voice was charming and made her heart tingle. On the other hand, Roy, who had just finished absorbing, disregarded everything else and immediately lifted the eyelids of the fox-ear witch. Seeing the black line missing from her pupils, the big stone in his heart finally settled slowly. Success. Beside her, the white-haired and silver-eyed witch watched the entire scene, her eyes filled with complexity, but more importantly, she was still excited, and there was no doubt in her heart that she could really eliminate pollution. I'm not dreaming. As a witch, the white-haired and silver-eyed witch naturally does not need to observe pollution with the naked eye like Roy. From the subtle changes in the magical aura on the fox-ear witch, she can determine that pollution has indeed decreased. And the situation on fox-ear witch no longer worsened, and her state gradually stabilized. What shocked the silver-eyed witch even more was that after inhaling the pollution, Roy did not have any scent of pollution on her body. He seems to be able to absorb pollution without any cost. The pressure in his heart was relieved, and Roy had the leisure to feel the difference in energy inhaled into his body. If the magic of the white-haired and silver-eyed witch feels as refreshing as eating ice cream in summer, then the magic of the fox-eared witch feels like eating marshmallows, soft and smooth, with a feeling of no stress, but it also makes people unconsciously want to indulge in it. Should it be due to different magical characteristics? He guessed in his heart. The awakening of infinite desire is based on the original sin characteristic. Lust, and since there is lust, there must also be other original sin characteristics. After taking a sip of the fox-ear witch, Roy's energy swelled up again, and the feeling of being fully supported reappeared. He understood that this time it was really the limit, no matter how hard he squeezed, he couldn't squeeze it out anymore. He had to wait for his body to digest some before he could absorb it again, otherwise he might be directly overwhelmed. Looking at the white-haired and silver-eyed witch with divergent eyes and immersed in a certain emotion, Roy smiled. "Miss Witch, how about we talk about it?" This time, the silver-haired witch didn't say anything more, but nodded silently. Roy organized the language and said seriously, "I am just an ordinary lord's son and have no fundamental conflict of interest with the witch. I don't know what your purpose is for catching me, but I think there is room for negotiation between us. I believe you have also seen my special ability to absorb the pollution inside the witch's body, and after a period of digestion, it can be absorbed again. This is the only useful thing for you witches as an ordinary person. To be honest, you need me to have the ability to eliminate pollution, and I want to have a chance to survive and establish a foundation for myself. This ability to absorb pollution is unlikely to be used unless it is my subjective willingness. You don't have to think of arresting me and imprisoning me as a tool to remove pollution. For me, losing freedom is no different from dying. Once this happens, I will not hesitate to choose suicide. I cherish my life, but I am not afraid of death. Don't doubt my determination. Roy's voice was calm, but the more so, the more one could feel his resolute attitude. The white-haired and silver-eyed witch remained silent, never thinking about Roy's imprisonment. The pursuit and darkness she has experienced over the years have made her no longer as pure as before. Inexplicably, she remembered the calmness shown by Roy when she broke into the Lord's mansion not long ago. This made her understand from the bottom of her heart that what Roy was saying at the moment was not empty talk. Seeing that the white-haired and silver-eyed witch remained silent, Roy continued. We can collaborate. I will remove pollution for you and help you cover up your whereabouts, so that you can settle down in the Blackstone territory, while you do 3 things for me. Don't worry, these 3 things are definitely within your capabilities, and once you feel there is a risk, you can directly refuse. Miss Witch, what do you think? Roy stared straight at the girl, waiting for her reply. Do you dare to cooperate with the witch? Are you helping us cover up our whereabouts? The white-haired and silver-eyed witch grinned and said, Are you not afraid of being treated as a heretic by the temple and put on fire? That's the future. I value my current life and interests more than this, Roy said calmly. Haha. The silver-haired witch smiled and said, If you're not afraid, then naturally we're even more afraid. That's settled, then, Roy said, My name is Roy, can you tell me your name, Miss Witch? As a collaborator, not knowing the other person's name is very impolite. Ace Fisher. A very nice name. So, Miss Ace, please take good care of me in the future. After a brief silence, the response was a faint and imperceptible hum. Let me talk about the update issue. Starting from tomorrow, during the new book period, 2 chapters will be updated every night at 7:10 p.m. Please follow up with the new book every day. Follow-up is really important for the author. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Nights. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Nights. After reaching the agreement, the sword of Damocles hanging above his head disappeared, and Roy finally felt a little relaxed. But he dare not completely lose his guard. Although the possibility of the witch attacking him again is extremely low due to interests, it cannot be completely ruled out. In this world, only one's own strength will not betray, making people feel at ease. He can't wait to digest the energy in his body as soon as possible and become stronger. However, before that, there are still some things that need to be dealt with quickly. Miss Ace, may I ask how my guards are doing? Roy looked at the silver-haired witch Ace and asked. Nothing, just frozen body, losing mobility in the short term, recovery takes some time. Ace shook her head, and after making the agreement, her tone became much calmer, no longer sounding so cold. Your close guard, that bronze 2-star knight, will recover faster, probably in 10 minutes to break free. I think I need to go back as soon as possible. Roy breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing the other person's words. Although he had no emotional connection with these guard knights, they were ultimately protecting him. If he died because of this, he would also feel guilty. Your attack characteristics are too obvious. Uncle Red can definitely guess that the witch took me away. I'm worried he might go and notify the temple, Roy said in a deep voice. Excuse me, it's better to have less of this thing. After I have dealt with the impact of this incident, I will arrange for you to live in the Lord's mansion. During this period, I will be sorry for you to continue living here. You don't have to worry about me running away either. Blackstone Ridge is right here, where can I go? Is it unfair? Upon hearing this familiar and distant word, Ace's eyes became momentarily dazed. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken the word to her, but she quickly recovered and nodded, seemingly explaining casually. I originally only wanted to silently take you away, but the Bronze 2-star Knight has already cultivated his fighting spirit and his spiritual sensitivity far exceeds that of ordinary people. I am not good at concealment, so I can only use magic. Upon hearing this, Roy nodded. Previously, the two had a hostile relationship, so there was no room for extravagance. As a witch, Ace did not kill those guards and was already very lenient. Miss Ace, could you please take me back? As for myself, it will take a long time to go back. I want to return as soon as possible so that we can settle the situation quickly. Of course, this is not one of the three things. Fox ears. Roy paused in his tone. Elena Flammel is the name of the fox-ear witch. Roy's heart twitched before continuing to speak. Miss Elena, the pollution on her body should be relieved for a day or two, shouldn't it be okay? Elsa, the white-haired and silver-eyed witch, carefully examined the condition of Elena, the fox-eared witch, and confirmed that the pollution was no longer increasing and the situation had stabilized. She nodded slightly and said, at present, it should be okay, but we still need to absorb more as soon as possible. Let's go, I'll take you back. As she spoke, Ace extended her hand. Under the candlelight, her delicate palm reflected a faint arc, like the finest white glazed porcelain, giving off an inexplicable impulse. Roy reached out to grip Ace's hand, feeling soft to the touch, but the next moment, he felt his body light. A magical force acted on his body, causing him to lift slightly off the ground, and then the surrounding scenery suddenly became blurred, swiftly passing by on both sides. Is this the power of a witch? Roy exclaimed in his heart. It has to be said that being enemies with such a force is indeed frightening and sleepless, but if such a force is an ally, it is incredibly reassuring. Since he couldn't see clearly around him, he decided not to look. Roy closed his eyes and regained his composure. What happened tonight has kept his nerves on edge, so now he can take advantage of his return time to rest a bit. About 5 minutes later, the airflow around him slowed down and Roy opened his eyes. The gate of the Lord's mansion is now in front of us. Can I help you with anything? A cold voice came into Roy's ear, and he smiled and shook his head, no need. After speaking, he stepped forward and walked into the door. In the darkness, Ace quietly watched as Roy's figure disappeared. As soon as he entered the mansion, Roy heard hurried footsteps approaching the door. Soon, a group of fully armed knights who were about to go out to search appeared in his eyes. With 4 eyes facing each other, Captain Knight's eyes under his helmet showed a look of surprise, followed by great joy. Young Master Roy. Due to being too excited, Captain Knight's voice was loud, and the second after his voice fell. Shio. The sound of breaking through the air sounded, and Red flew over the eaves. He arrived here as soon as possible, and when he saw that Roy was not injured and his breath was very calm, he breathed a big sigh of relief. Young Master Roy, it's great that you're okay, that. Uncle Red, let's go in and talk, Roy interrupted Red. Currently, only he and the other knights should know about the witch, so it's better not to continue spreading it. After speaking, Roy walked forward first. Notify other search teams to come back and strengthen the security of the mansion. Yes. After instructing the Knights team, Red quickly caught up with Roy. A few minutes later, inside the cleaned cabin, Roy sat at a wooden table, while Red stood beside him with a helmet in his arms. Young Master Roy, the witch who took you away. Roy didn't answer Red's question, but instead asked, Uncle Red, have you notified the temple? Upon hearing this, Red shook his head and said, Not yet. I was just about to go and you came back, but I have already sent someone to deliver the letter to the Lord. So. Then don't tell the news that the temple which has appeared in Blackstone Ridge for now, Roy said in a deep voice. This. Red's eyes showed confusion. Regardless of the previous witch's capture of Roy, it posed a huge threat to Blackstone. Even for passing witches, telling the temple to send someone to arrest them was the best option. This uncontrolled witch is a wild bomb, usually highly polluted, and once it explodes, the consequences are unimaginable. Listen to me, in a few days, I will give you a satisfactory explanation. Upon hearing Roy's words, Red fell silent and nodded, I understand. Even though he had many doubts in his heart, no matter what, Roy was the son of the Lord, and in the absence of the Lord, he was the most esteemed person in the entire territory. Roy did not say anything to obstruct the delivery of the letter to the Lord, who was his original father. Because he knew that even if he said it, Red wouldn't agree. If such a big thing happened and Red hadn't notified the Lord yet, he would be greatly derelict of duty, violating his principles as a knight. As a knight of the Turumber family, Red's loyal object was the Lord in first place, followed by Roy, who was the son of the Lord. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Breathing Method. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Breathing Method. In the room, after a brief silence, Roy's gaze swept over Red's knight's sword at his waist, and his heart twitched as he thought of something. The normal digestion speed of energy in his body is very slow. If he practices as a knight, can this process be accelerated? Thinking of this, Roy's spirit lifted and he spoke up, Uncle Red, can you teach me the cultivation of knights now? I feel like my body has almost recovered. If you don't believe me, you can have a check. Up. Upon hearing Roy's request, Red shook his head and said with a bitter smile, I've seen your body before. It's only been 2 days, how could you recover so quickly? At the end of the sentence, Red was slightly stunned. When Roy first returned, he only checked his mental state and whether he was injured. After confirming that he was safe, he didn't look much and didn't pay much attention to Roy's physical weakness. Nowadays, it seems a bit different. Red reached out and lightly tapped Roy's upper body several times, gradually changing his expression. Your body. His voice was full of disbelief. The Bronze Knight's familiarity with his body far exceeded that of ordinary people. After a simple examination, he found that Roy's physical fitness was completely different from 2 days ago. If it weren't for the person in front of him's appearance, voice, and demeanor not changing at all, he would have thought he had been swapped. How about it, Uncle Red? My body should be able to practice as a knight now, right? Roy smiled. Not only is it possible, the physical fitness of a novice knight may not be as strong as you. Red's eyes were still filled with shock, and he instinctively responded. Then he shook his head and stared at Roy. Master Roy, the changes in your body and the witch. It's indeed related, Roy did not deny. You don't have to worry, it's related to the explanation I'll give you in a few days. Upon hearing this, Red took a deep breath and nodded, since that's the case, I won't ask much. However, it's already late today, so I can only explain some common knowledge related to knightly cultivation to you first. We can only proceed with specific cultivation tomorrow morning. Roy looked at Red eagerly, waiting for his explanation. After briefly organizing the language without asking Roy to wait any longer, Red slowly said. Knight cultivation is essentially a process in which the human body repeatedly breaks through its limits. The initial practice of knighthood was mainly focused on refining the body, using various methods combined with medicinal baths to repair the body to the limits of the human body. This process was for novice knights. When the stamina reaches the limit of the human body, the apprentice knight can start learning breathing techniques. Generally speaking, ordinary knights can only learn the shallow breathing techniques of the bad streets. This breathing technique only assists in refining the stamina, but cannot cultivate fighting spirit and promote bronze. While using breathing techniques to beat their bodies, formal knights will also begin specialized training in weapons, choose a weapon that suits them, and raise funds to purchase their own armor, weapons, and warhorses. The combat power of a formal knight is no longer something that ordinary people can compete against. A formal knight who cultivates to this level can reach twice the physical limit of an ordinary person. To break through from the official knight to the bronze rank, one must learn advanced breathing techniques. The level of breathing techniques can be divided into low, advanced, and special levels, from low to high. The lowest level of breathing techniques that can cultivate fighting spirit is also advanced breathing techniques. The breathing technique of the Turumber family is the advanced breathing technique bestowed upon them by the Duke of Soros on the border. The explosive breathing technique. This breathing technique can be considered top-notch even among advanced breathing techniques, and is said to be the lower version of a special breathing technique. I have been fortunate enough to learn the explosive flame breathing technique, by the grace of the Lord. Although my expertise in this breathing technique is far inferior to Lord Lord's, it should be sufficient for me to receive your enlightenment in teaching, young Master Roy. Your physique is stronger than that of a novice knight on the brink of breakthrough, enough to support the practice of breathing techniques. Next, I will tell you the content of this breathing method. Please take note and memorize it first, and we will start our first attempt of breathing method tomorrow. Roy nodded and then listened attentively to the content of the explosive breathing method, afraid of missing a word. Half an hour later, Red, who had repeated the explosive breathing method 3 times, looked at Roy in front of him and smiled, saying, "Young Master Roy, have you taken note of it?" "Remember," Roy nodded. The literal content of the explosive breathing method is not much, and its difficulty lies in successfully taking the first breath and in practice. Traveling through this world, perhaps due to the fusion of his original soul, Roy's memory has become much stronger than in his previous life, and it is not difficult to quickly jot down these contents. "Your memory is amazing," Red exclaimed before bowing down to resign. "So I'll leave first. You still need some preparation for tomorrow's practice." "Wait, Uncle Red." As Red was about to leave, Roy quickly called out to him. In his somewhat puzzled gaze, he spoke up and asked, "I want to know to what extent a knight's cultivation is necessary to have resistance in front of a witch." Upon hearing this question, Red's face didn't show much surprise. It's not surprising that young Master Roy was recently captured by a witch. Just Red sighed and said, "Witches. They are lucky and cursed. They are said to be lucky because even the witches who have just been alienated from ordinary people, even if their abilities are not very aggressive, are not something that ordinary bronze knights can deal with. As long as the ability is slightly stronger, even the silver knight above bronze is difficult to compete with. The most powerful witch, it is said that even the golden knight is not a match, and it needs to rely on the tactics of a sea of people to have the possibility of being caught. Sometimes when I think about it, it's really enviable. Witches don't need to practice day and night like knights. Alienation can surpass countless sweat. They are lucky, but they are also unfortunate. The power of knights comes with great difficulty, accumulating bit by bit without any side effects, and every time the witch uses her power, she is contaminated by magic. No matter how powerful the witch is, the ending is destined to be tragic. Young Master Roy, if you want to gain the power to resist the witch, you must at least have the strength of a silver knight, but a knight in this realm. Red shook his head and didn't say anything more, but it was not difficult to see from his expression that he didn't have much confidence in Roy. In fact, even with breathing techniques, not every formal knight can break through to the bronze level. Compared to apprenticeship and formality, bronze is a stage of qualitative change and the beginning of truly reaching transcendence. Young Master Roy has a heart to cultivate the path of knighthood, and Red is very happy and willing to teach. However, after all, Roy is already 16 years old, and it is too late to start practicing knighthood now. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. First Practice. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 First Practice. Red left. In the room, Roy sat alone on a chair. A faint crimson moonlight flowed through the window, adding a touch of confusion to furniture such as the tabletop and wardrobe. Breathing method. Silver night. Roy muttered to himself. Although a promise was made with the white-haired and silver-eyed witch, Ace, no matter what, it is still her own strength that is the true foundation for settling down. The silver night is an unattainable presence for ordinary people, but Roy has confidence in achieving it. Which plus infinite desire gave him the capital to continuously strengthen his physique even without exercise. Although eager to pursue nightly cultivation, without Red's guidance, Roy dared not attempt rashly. Breathing method is not something that can be practiced with knowledge of its content. Everyone's body has subtle differences, involving internal organs. Many details are not written or cannot be recorded, and educators need to sort and adjust them step by step based on the student's physical condition. The starlight is sparse, the moonlight is faint, and many things have happened tonight. Unconsciously, it is already 2 o'clock in the night. With anticipation in mind, Roy fell asleep. The next day, just as it was getting dark, Roy opened his eyes. After washing up, changing clothes, and having dinner, he followed Red to the Lord's training ground. There are 2 training grounds in the Lord's mansion, one for the daily training of knights, and the other for the Lord's use. As the son of the Lord, Roy can naturally use this training ground. Uncle Red, let's get started. After arriving at the training ground, Roy couldn't wait to look at Red. Last night, he was thinking about breathing techniques, which caused him to wake up several times from his sleep. Upon seeing Roy's performance, Red was secretly pleased and spoke solemnly, "Young Master Roy, before starting to try breathing techniques, I will explain the essence of breathing techniques to you. Everything has its own breathing rhythm, whether it's flesh and blood, or rocks and trees. The initial breathing method was created by Knights pioneers by observing and simulating all things in nature. There exists an extraordinary force called magic in the world, which has unpredictable power, is wild and difficult to tame, and has extremely terrifying destructive power. Therefore, direct contact with magic by the human body not only has a high probability of sudden death, but even if it survives, it will be contaminated by magic and die soon after. Just like a witch. In other words, you can also understand witches as a very lucky few who have survived the invasion of magic. Of course, there are also differences, but that's not something I can understand. Regarding the witch, more secrets are still in the hands of the temple. Due to Roy's experience last night and his interest in witches, Red specifically explained to Roy what he knew about witches, and then continued to turn the topic back to breathing techniques. Magic is difficult to control and poses great harm, but its powerful power makes people yearn for it. Breathing is created to allow the human body to absorb magic with flesh and blood. The apprentice knight exhausted his physical strength to the limit of an ordinary person, while the formal knight began practicing the breathing technique, which essentially involves absorbing the magical particles in the environment through repeated breaths, gradually allowing his body to adapt to the magic. The magical particles transformed by the human body, due to the addition of human vitality, have fundamentally different properties from the magic in nature. Therefore, the extraordinary energy mastered by the Bronze Knight is also known as fighting spirit, not magic. Next, I will guide you to start your first attempt at breathing. During this process, if you feel any discomfort, please speak up immediately. By the way, did you forget anything about the content of the explosive breathing method last night? Roy shook his head. He had already memorized such an important thing before going to bed, how could he possibly forget it? Let's get started then. Under Red's guidance, Roy began his first attempt at breathing. After continuous adjustment and correction, it was already 2 hours later when Roy was able to smoothly perform the explosive breathing method. On the training ground, Red wiped the sweat off his forehead and his face turned a bit pale. Guiding a person to practice the first breath method is not a simple task. It requires the instructor to control their fighting spirit and guide and observe within the student's body without harming them, which requires mental effort comparable to extreme sports. Fortunately, Roy's intelligence is very good. Every time there is something wrong, he can adjust it with just a little adjustment, and there is no need to correct it again in the future, which saved Red a lot of effort. He was already prepared to spend several days in the breathing method adjustment stage. It seems that young Master Roy still has a good talent in the path of knighthood. Watching Roy sit with his eyes closed and breathing, Red thought to himself. He himself is somewhat talented in breathing techniques, but when he first made adjustments to his breathing techniques, he also spent most of his time unable to help but feel a sense of regret in Red's heart. If young Master Roy was willing to engage in knightly cultivation when he was of appropriate age, now he would still be a senior official knight even if he could not advance to the bronze rank. It would still be too late to engage in knightly cultivation now, wasting years and missing the best period of cultivation. The most suitable age for practicing as a knight is between 12 and 14 years old. At this time, the human body is undergoing rapid development and is also the easiest period to adapt to magical particles. Missing this age group, although it is not impossible to cultivate, it will be much more difficult to adapt to magic particles, and Red himself suffered losses in this aspect. But he has no choice. The advanced breathing technique is extremely precious, and there is no way for ordinary people to have access to it. If it were not for the grace of the Lord, who was able to practice the explosive inflammation breathing technique at the age of 30, he would still not have been able to advance to bronze. But also because he was too old to practice advanced breathing techniques, he suffered greatly in the process of adapting to magical particles in his body. After being promoted to bronze, he found it difficult to move forward. Over a decade had passed, and it was only then that he was able to take a small step on the path of knighthood and reach the bronze 2 stars. This makes Red attach great importance to this aspect of the issue. Looking at Roy in front of him who had the conditions but didn't cherish them, Red felt a bit complicated, but more importantly, he was still regretful. Missing the best time for cultivation means that no matter how hard Roy tries in the future, the upper limit will not be much higher. I just hope that young Master Roy can use magic particles faster in this process. Red remembers clearly that it took him half a year to barely use the magic particles. But Roy is now 16 years old and has missed the golden age for 2 years. Although it is better than him missing more than a decade, there is no fundamental difference. Missing is missing, sigh shaking his head, Red turned around and prepared to prepare a medicinal bath for Roy. The essence of breathing is the process by which the body adapts to magical particles. Before fully adapting, every attempt will cause significant damage to the body, and it is necessary to cooperate with a medicinal bath for rapid recovery. But just as Red was about to turn around, the mutation on Roy's body caught his attention. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Visitors from the Temple. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Visitors from the temple in the center of the training ground. Roy's body surface, cross-legged on the cushion, showed an extremely faint white glow, like tiny fireflies dancing. Is this the manifestation of the body absorbing magical particles after adapting to them? Red's pupils widened little by little, and a huge sense of absurdity surged in his heart. A few seconds ago, he was secretly regretting that Roy's future path as a knight was bleak. A few seconds later, Roy surprisingly achieved the magic particle absorption that only experienced knights could achieve. It is only a matter of time before a senior official knight who can achieve this is promoted to bronze. The cultivation of a formal knight can be divided into 3 stages. Adaptation adjustment of breathing method. Gradually adapting the body to magical particles through repeated breaths. Absorbing magical particles and gradually merging and transforming them with one's own vitality. When the amount of fusion transformation is sufficient and the first strand of fighting energy is born in the body, it is the day when the official knight is promoted to the bronze rank. From then on, knights truly came into contact with the extraordinary, and the world was vastly different. But now, a newcomer who has just completed breathing adaptation adjustment, surprisingly crossed the second stage of gradually adapting to magic particles in just a few minutes and reached the third stage of fusion and transformation of magic particles and their own vitality. How can this not shock Red? Young Master Roy's talent in the path of knighthood is so terrifying. Red was a bit confused. A few years ago, when Roy first practiced as a knight, he only did basic physical exercises and did not involve breathing techniques. Therefore, Red could not imagine that Roy's talent in breathing techniques had reached such a terrifying level. He has never even heard of such a talent, not to mention it. It is said that the youngest daughter of Duke Soros of the Glow Empire's border has the greatest knightly talent in the empire, but even she spent a full week from starting to learn breathing techniques to adapting to magical particles, which has already broken the empire's past record. Not to mention the shock in Red's heart at this moment. On the other hand, Roy was immersed in an unprecedented state of wonder. At the beginning, the adaptive adjustment of the blazing flame breathing technique was painful and difficult, which made him realize the difficulty of practicing as a knight. After finally adjusting, Roy carefully breathed according to the requirements of the breathing method. But it was this breath that made him realize something was wrong. According to Red, during the first breath, as the body has not yet adapted to the magical particles, the body tissue will be torn apart in contact with them, causing trauma, and this process is accompanied by pain. The practice of a formal knight is to undergo the pain of breathing techniques time and time again, ultimately allowing the body to fully adapt to the existence of magical particles. It is precisely in this process of damage and repair that the formal knight's physique gradually improves, ultimately reaching twice the limit of an ordinary person. But now, with the first breath taking place, accompanied by the ingestion of magical particles in the environment, Roy not only did not feel pain, but on the contrary, he felt a warm and comfortable feeling soaking himself in the hot spring. His body seems to be naturally adapted to magical particles. As soon as a magical particle extracted from the environment by the breathing method entered his body, it was greedily devoured by his cells and ultimately transformed into a more gentle and completely controlled energy. That's just fighting spirit. Roy thought to himself. Of course, because the quantity is too small, this bit of fighting spirit cannot be released and is far from enough to support the knight's promotion to the bronze rank. But the first bit of fighting spirit appeared, will the following fighting spirit be far behind? The qualitative change has been achieved, and the next step is to accumulate the quantity step by step. When thousands of threads converge into one, it is the time to promote bronze. After breathing for another hour, Roy struggled again to ingest a magical particle from the environment. When the transformed second string of fighting energy accumulates in his body, he also has a deeper understanding of the explosive inflammation breathing method. As an advanced breathing technique, the explosive breathing technique can obtain 1 magic particle per hour during cultivation. This speed is already considered fast among many advanced breathing techniques, but for Roy, it is undoubtedly too slow. His body absorbs and transforms a magic particle in just 3 minutes. If the magic particle is sufficient, he can gain 20 strands of fighting energy per hour. Based on breathing for 10 hours a day, it only takes 5 days at most to merge 1,000 threads and promote bronze. But now, due to the limitation of magical particles, the progress has been greatly slowed down. Suddenly, Roy thought of something. The essence of fighting spirit is the relatively gentle energy that is transformed from the fusion of magic and the vitality of the body. Since magical particles in the natural environment can merge with the vitality of the body, what about the magic absorbed from the witch? Can it also be used? Thinking of this, Roy's spirit was boosted, and he, who was extremely lacking in magical particles, immediately began to try. Under his strong subjective will, the energy clusters that had been absorbed from the white-haired silver-eyed witch Elsa and the fox-eared witch Elena separated into strands and began to integrate into the body cells. After more than 10 minutes, Roy's heart was filled with joy as he looked at the newly emerged 5 strands of fighting energy in his body. It's really possible. Compared to the difficulty of using explosive breathing to extract magical particles from the natural environment, this method is much faster. It can even be said that the factor that originally restricted Roy's promotion to the bronze rank has directly shifted from the number of magic particles to the speed at which his body's vitality and magic merge and transform into fighting spirit. At the same time, Roy couldn't help but become more and more wary of the witch. Just a small amount of magic sucked from the witch's body is enough for him to advance to the bronze rank, and even has surplus. In this way, to what extent should the magic within the witch's body be majestic? No wonder last night, when facing the white-haired and silver-eyed witch Elsie, Red couldn't even resist for a few seconds. The gap is really too big. With just one fighting spirit, one can be promoted to a bronze knight, and the magic of a witch is more than just one. After trying, Roy paused his first breath. Although I really want to continue practicing, there are still some things that need to be dealt with first. Including the repeated warnings and seals from the knights who saw the witch last night, as well as the placement of the white-haired and silver-eyed witch Ace and the fox-eared witch Elena afterwards. Roy opened his eyes, and what caught his eye was Red's stunned face. "Uncle Red." Roy whispered. Upon hearing the sound, Red suddenly woke up and looked at Roy with an unprecedented light in his eyes. "Young Master Roy, your talent in the path of chivalry is simply incomparable. If Lord knows, he must be very happy." Roy smiled and stood up from the ground, ready to say something when a hurried sound of footsteps came from far to near. Roy and Red turned their heads at the same time. This is the Lord's training ground, and since Red has already given instructions in advance, no one will come unless there is an extremely urgent matter. Dong dong. The entrance door to the training ground was hurriedly knocked on, accompanied by an anxious voice. "Young Master Roy, Lord Red, there's someone from the temple." "Temple, is someone here?" Upon hearing this news, Roy's eyes showed a hint of shock and he turned to look at Red beside him. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Letters and Bad News. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Letters and Bad News. Faced with Roy's gaze, Red's eyes were also filled with surprise. "I didn't inform the temple, and I also warned the knights I witnessed last night not to leak information. The nearest temple church is 2 days away from Blackstone, and from a time perspective, it's too late. In this world, knights who are loyal to the Lord are already their retainers. Even if the Lord executes them, the imperial law cannot hold them accountable. Therefore, knights rarely dare to disobey the Lord's orders." After listening to Red's explanation, Roy suddenly came over and made some guesses in his heart. However, it is not the time to explore. The key is to first understand the origin of the temple. If it involves witches, Roy's face was not right, but a sharp gleam flashed deep in his pupils. After practicing breathing techniques, he became aware of the power of witches, but also gained a deeper understanding of their impact on him. The foundation of strength lies in the combination of infinite desire and witches. If he has the talent of unlimited desire without the magic provided by the witch, then he has no way of quickly becoming stronger. If the temple endangers his interests in thought, Roy nodded at Red and walked to the entrance of the training ground. He opened the door and looked at the knight who was reporting the news. A young man in his 20s said, "Where are they?" "At the entrance of the mansion." "Master Roy, the people in the temple have always been domineering, and the visitors are 2 temple knights. The gatekeeper probably won't be able to stop them for long. I will report to you as soon as possible." Roy nodded and encouraged, saying, "Well done," then walked towards the door. Behind him, Red followed quickly. As he walked to the entrance of the mansion, Roy saw 2 visiting temple knights. They are about 2 meters tall, wearing bright silver full-body armor. One person on the left is slightly shorter, wearing a knight's sword at the waist and standing slightly behind. The other person on the right is taller, and their armor is more magnificent. The bright silver color is the main body, and there are even darker and more magnificent patterns on the edges. Behind them is a giant sword that is almost the same length. At a glance, it can be seen that the two are mainly composed of the giant sword temple knight on the right. At the same time as Roy saw them, Roy's figure was also reflected in the eyes under the gaps in the helmets of the two temple knights. I am Roy Turnberg, the son of Lord Blackstone. The two temple knights have been waiting for a long time. They were just practicing and arrived a bit late. As he spoke, Roy walked forward and reached out his right hand to the giant sword temple knight on the right, who seemed to be the master, with an impeccable ceremonial smile on his face. We disturbed the sudden visit and did not deliver the visit letter in advance. A deep voice came from under the helmet of the giant sword temple knight, and at the same time, he reached out his hand and lightly shook it with Roy's hand. I don't know why Lord Knight came to visit. Oh, I'm sorry, it was my negligence. Please come to the mansion to discuss again. Roy made an apologetic gesture of invitation. Two temple knights nodded and followed him into the Lord's mansion. After a period of time, inside the reception hall, Roy and two temple knights sat down respectively, and a maid brought tea. Behind Roy stood Red, fully armed. He looked at the two temple knights with a hint of vigilance. From these two temple knights, he felt a huge threat, especially the one led by the giant sword temple knight, who gave him a sense of oppression no less than that of the Silver Knight level lord. I am Rami Galloway, accompanied by my attendant, the Bronze One-Star Knight, Al Hartley. Rami, the Knight of the Giant Sword Temple, whispered. Roy, let me call you that. I am good friends with your father, Lord Jess Turnberg. It turned out to be Uncle Rami. I'm sorry, I didn't know you had this kind of relationship with my father. Roy stood up somewhat surprised. A hint of amazement appeared in Red's eyes beside him. Are you Mr. Rami? Red, long time no see. Knight Rami of the Giant Sword Temple took off his helmet, revealing his wild pale golden long hair, paired with a resolute face, giving the illusion of facing a lion directly. He looked at Red with a smile on his face and nodded in greeting. Roy looked at Red, who quickly explained, Young Master Roy, Mr. Rami was a good friend of the Lord when he was young. The two of them had participated in the Imperial War together. Later, when the war ended, the Lord received an Imperial Award, and Mr. Rami is said to have joined the temple. More than 20 years have passed, and it's been such a long time since we last saw each other. The changes have been so significant that I wouldn't have dared to recognize each other unless Mr. Rami mentioned it. It's been a long time since we last saw each other. Rami sighed and turned his gaze to Roy, his tone gradually sinking. Roy, do you know why we're here this time? Without waiting for Roy's reply, he said to himself, 3 days ago, someone provided evidence of the presence of the ice witch within the Blackstone domain to the cathedral temple in the province of Rafa, and pointed out that Roy Turember, the son of the Blackstone domain, was involved in an affair with the ice witch. The temple attached great importance to it and immediately dispatched the Divine Punishment Knights to investigate at Blackstone. I am the captain of the 4th Divine Punishment Team under the Temple of the Lafa Provincial Cathedral, so I took on this task. Uncle Rami. Upon hearing this, Roy frowned and wanted to say something, but Rami across from him raised his hand and stopped Roy from speaking. He continued, the source of this intelligence is unknown, and the source of the information provided is extremely cautious. It is impossible to trace the origin from the material of the letter paper, the mailing route, and other aspects. Every year, the temple receives a lot of similar intelligence, some of which are true and some are false. However, such caution is very rare, and it is difficult not to associate it with premeditated behavior. It's okay to just say that, but the timing of this message was too clever. Rami's voice was low, with a hint of hidden concern. About 4 days ago, I received a message from your father telling me that he was going to do something he had to do, and life and death were unpredictable. Therefore, he has applied to the Imperial Parliament to pass on the title of Lord to you, who is his legitimate heir. When I received this letter, it was already 3 days after it was sent out. Today is the 7th day of the letter's delivery. According to the efficiency of the Imperial Council, the appointment of you as Lord and Blackstone Lord should be on the way now, and it will arrive almost tomorrow. Roy, did you know that in the task execution process of the temple, the object is the nobles themselves, and the nobles' sons are two completely different ways? The former is a noble identity recognized by the empire, and even if suspected of being associated with witches, it is handled by the ruling court under the empire itself. As a whole interest group, the nobles often turn big and small things into small ones, and the punishment that ultimately falls on the nobles may be just a small financial punishment. The temple has the right to directly dispose of the latter. In other words, the person who provided this witch intelligence has a very good time calculation. Today, your identity is only the son of a lord, and tomorrow, you will be the true lord. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Follow the plan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Follow the plan. At the moment when Rami's voice stopped, the atmosphere in the reception hall became unusually heavy. Even Red, who is not familiar with combat beyond force, can feel the danger involved. The person behind the scenes who provided information about the witch to the Lafa Provincial Cathedral Temple undoubtedly had a malicious intention of putting Roy to death. For the temple, anyone or power associated with the wandering witch is considered heretical. Every witch must be in the hands of the temple. And the only outcome of heresy is to be tied to the stake and burned to ashes by the flames. Today, if the Templar Knight who arrived was not Lord Blackstone's former friend, if it were any other Templar Knight, Roy's best fate now would be to be bound and thrown into the temple's divine punishment prison. I can't wait for the appointment of the Imperial Parliament to inherit the title. The relationship between Lord Blackstone and Templar Knight Rami, even Red, who served as Lord Blackstone's attendant knight, was almost forgotten, let alone others. In other words, if it weren't for this secret intelligence that others could hardly have known that saved Roy's life, Roy would undoubtedly have died. And the person behind the scenes who can calculate so precisely is likely to have the means to deal with Roy, who was sent to the divine punishment prison. The twists and turns in this world, just thinking about them, made Red tremble with fear, but what made him even more concerned was what Rami had said about the unpredictable things that Lord had to do. Mr. Rami, do you know what Lord had to do? Rami shook his head and said in a deep voice, I don't know. In the letter, Jess repeatedly wrote, "Don't come find me" 3 times, and I also found out through the secret channels of the temple. 7 days ago, after Jess sent the letter to me, he completely lost his trace. Upon hearing this, Red fell silent. Although he has absolute confidence in the Lord, this time even Lord himself said, life and death are unpredictable. It can be imagined that he must be doing something very, very dangerous, and even what he wants to do, he doesn't want his friends and family to know, for fear of dragging him down. Putting his worries about Lord into his heart for the time being, Red turned his head to look at Roy beside him. The Lord's situation is certainly not good, but at least he has the strength of a silver knight by his side, and there is always room for maneuver. However, Roy, although he showed unprecedented knightly talent this morning, his time for cultivation is still too short. Although he started absorbing magic particles, he will definitely not be a match for the official knights in a fight. After all, the strength of a knight is determined not only by physical fitness, but also by the quality of equipment, the cultivation of weapons, combat experience, and so on. But upon seeing it, Red was slightly stunned. Unlike the imagined expressions of panic or fear, Roy's face at this moment was very calm. As a bronze knight, Red can determine the authenticity of a person's performance through subtle facial expressions, unless the other person is a true emoji master. In his opinion, Roy's emotions are really stable now, without any panic. Red can see this, and Rami, who is stronger sitting opposite, can also see it. Rami greatly appreciated this calm and composed performance in the face of a crisis, saying, Jess has a good son. Uncle Rami, besides letters, has my father left any useful news for you? Roy looked at Rami and said in a deep voice. The succession of the title was not immediately communicated to Lord Blackstone, who was his son, but instead sent a message to his former friend, Templar Knight Rami. It can be imagined that Lord Blackstone had already anticipated his and Roy's situation at that time. In this situation, if Lord Blackstone has anything he wants to explain or inform him of, he will inevitably pass on the channel that Knight Rami, in Lord Blackstone's mind, considers safe. Yes, there is. Rami nodded and took out a brass key from his pocket. While sending me a message, your father also sent me a key. The letter instructed me to give you this key. With this key, you can enter the family treasure room, which contains the things he left for you. Taking the brass key from Rami's hand, the slightly heavy feel made Roy realize that the material of this key is not simple. As for the family treasure trove that Rami mentioned, Roy had already rummaged through this place a few days ago while searching for magical items. Apart from some gold, silver, and gemstones, there was nothing valuable. Now it seems that there is still a hidden place where he has not found it. Alright, I've already told you what I need to tell you, and it's almost time for me to leave. If there's any news from your father, I'll notify you as soon as possible. Rami nodded to Roy, about to get up and leave. At this moment, Roy suddenly spoke out, Uncle Rami, please wait a moment. Upon hearing the plea to stay, Rami paused slightly before seeing Roy blink at him and saying, you haven't completed your mission yet. Isn't it disappointing for some people to just go back like this? Upon hearing these words, Remington immediately reacted and his eyes lit up as he looked at Roy. Good kid. It seems that the Turumber family won't be lonely in your hands. More than 10 minutes later, news spread throughout Blackstone that Roy Turumber, the son of Lord Blackstone, was being escorted by 2 Divine Punishment Knights to the Divine Punishment Prison. The specific reason is unknown, but the person who took the action was a Divine Punishment Knight from the temple. Anyone with some knowledge can guess that it should be related to the Wandering Witch. After all, Roy is the son of the Lord, and everything else except for the witch is handled by the Imperial Court, not the temple, even if he commits a crime. From Roy being detained and leaving the Lord's mansion to being trapped in a closed prison car, dozens or even hundreds of residents of Blackstone witnessed the entire process firsthand. If asked by others, these residents could even accurately describe the angry and trembling appearance of Blackstone Knight leader Red at the time, as well as Roy's disheveled expression. It is evident that this matter is true and not false. The arrest of Roy caused a huge uproar throughout the Blackstone territory. After all, as the Lord family of the Blackstone territory, the Turumber family was not very good to the Lords, but it was not too bad. At least it could keep the Lords alive, which is already very good compared to other border Lord families. And just 10 minutes after this incident, on the edge of the Blackstone collar, in an extremely ordinary cabin, a sneaky figure released numerous carrier pigeons, and he himself disappeared along the shadow of the eaves. In the late night when the moon stars are sparse, in small border towns like Blackstone Ridge, except for the vicinity of the Lord's mansion, it can be said that they can't see their hands. And the Lords basically fall asleep early after the sun sets. For them, life is already difficult, and unless there is something important, no one would waste kerosene to light the lights at night. Under the cover of night, the 2 figures perfectly merged into the shadow and entered the Lord's mansion without anyone noticing. The dim yellow kerosene light reflected the faces of Roy and Rami. Excuse me, Uncle Rami. Roy slightly bowed to Rami beside him, expressing gratitude. Where? Rami shook his head and looked at Roy with a satisfied expression in his eyes, as if looking at an outstanding junior. It's just a small matter. The bait has been dropped, and now we'll wait for the people behind the scenes to take the bait. Roy smiled and looked at the deep night sky, the dense pitch black, like a spider web draped around the Blackstone collar, waiting for the unguarded prey to enter. End of this chapter.